that, but we'll just make time before we head to lunch. Are you guys done with your presentations? Okay, I hope we don't hear any murmurs during the session this time. Okay, awesome. So, next session, I'm very happy to invite our next speaker, she's a senior in my college as well. How many of us are St. Xavier's Mighty Girl alumni here? Awesome. Good guys. Okay, so it's a pleasure to welcome Ms. Shreyasha Paudel, who is a PhD student at the University of Toronto in the Department of Computer Science. Her research focuses on interdisciplinary combining techniques of human-computer interaction and social sciences to study responsible use of data and AI algorithms. Her current research merges qualitative and quantitative research and looks at the use of impact of data, digitalization, and algorithms in developing countries in application such as disaster, risk reduction, civic technologies, and climate adaptation. Prior to starting her PhD research, she used to lead a team to detect bias, robustness, and validate safety of perception systems for self-driving cars at Ford Motor Company. She is an adjunct research fellow at NAMI and former technical advisor at Nepal Flying Labs. She has also worked as a researcher and consultant at various tech organizations in Kathmandu, Nepal, exploring issues of ethics, privacy, and AI biases in Nepalese context. She holds a master's in aerospace engineering from Stanford University and BSc in engineering from Harvard College. With a huge round of applause, let's welcome Ms. Shreyasha Paudel.
Thank you, Alok. It's a pleasure to be here. Last year at the AI school, I was here almost the entire 10 days, and it's a little sad I wasn't able to be here, but last but not the least, I'm here, and I hope you all are not too lectured out. We'll try to keep this more engaging and pretty today. The topic, AI ethics, is not like a lecture-focused topic. It's more about like your experiences and each of your perspectives count. So please be involved, please be engaged. Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and then I have questions for you interspersed within the slides as well. After Adam's introduction, I don't think I need the slides, but just to give you a brief introduction of how I see myself, I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Toronto. As Adam mentioned, my research is about data, digitization, and AI in developing countries. Most of my research work has happened in the context of Nepal, and I'm currently looking at technology design for climate and environmental justice. My current project focuses on use of disaster risk models, but also looking forward to using those models for climate adaptation, particularly focusing on how to integrate local situated contexts within the Nepali society in the generalized global framework of these models. Before that, I have a degree in robotics, both my bachelor's and master's. I worked in bias and AI safety in self-driving cars for over five years, and I've been working intermittently on and off in Nepal about like responsible use of AI and drones in Nepal. And most of my work has focused on how to contextualize data or the limited amount of data that exists, how to contextualize different cultural and language and diversity practices that exist in Nepal, which is most of the time not considered in like when we say best practices in AI or theories about AI. Today's talk will talk a lot about those kinds of issues, and we'll focus mostly, it won't be technical at all, but we'll focus on things we should keep in mind as we think about AI in society, AI in ethics, risks, concerns, etc. And as I said, ethics comes from experience, right? So could be any kind of minority, gender, race, ethnicity. If you think globally, Nepal is tiny, so you could consider yourself minority or you could not. Nobody. Perfect. I'm excited about the potentials of AI. Almost 85%. I'm scared of all the risks of AI. Few people. Great. And with that, we get to our topic. So these are few extremely recent headlines from newspapers. Is AI an existential risk? Right? If you Google this, you'll get a bunch of news headlines from just like this past month, May, about like how Google CEO warned of AI existential risk, OpenAI Sam Altman warned of AI's risk, AI's got Paudel, Jeffrey Hinton warns of dentures, is equal to Google. So it's been a very happening topic, lots of discussions, lots of Twitter debates, lots of online headlines, and some of them realistic, some of them extremely hype. But at the same time, as I said, it's a debate because as Jeffrey Hinton and Google CEO warned of existential risk, other experts have challenged those kinds of doomsday narrative. Francois Charlotte, the inventor of Keras, says that is it a distraction, right? The organizations most responsible for deploying AI in unsafe ways are also the loudest when they come to talk about AI safety. For this talk, I don't want to answer whether it's an existential risk or not, perhaps not, but globally, if you look at it in the academic literature, in the industry setting, in media, it's a topic of active debate. And we want to grab a little bit portion of it today and kind of talk about different perspectives of how it goes, and mostly from my own lens, right, from both my industry experience and my research right now, like how I see this topic. But before we talk about AI and existential risk and what will happen in the future, I do want to set the stage, start with a word of caution, which is that expectation is not equal to reality. I really like this comic because last year when I was doing this AI winter school in December 2022, Metaverse was all the hype, everybody was talking about Metaverse. We were just out of the lockdown, we were talking about like virtual reality, the potentials of Zoom, never having to go into the office, etc., etc. Now that reality has kicked in, we realize that there are certain things we get from face-to-face interaction which we can't quite get from our screen. Turns out we get tired of staring at screens all day. Turns out meeting people over food, over coffee, over tea gives you like informal conversations that's really difficult to do over Zoom. Doing good conference in Zoom takes a lot of effort and money and time, which somehow happens organically. In the same way, there were a lot of decent hypes, which again I wouldn't say like these technologies are impossible, are dying down, but the way media portrayed it when they were launching and the way media portrays it today is like pretty unbalanced. Self-driving cars, crypto, brain-machine interface, every time new technology gets invented or launched, right, media is like, this is gonna change everything. We don't have to worry about in self-driving cars driving ever again, in brain-machine interface typing ever again, right? And then eventually getting things to 80%, 50%, 70%, 90% working is easy. The last 10%, 5% is really challenging, and then the hype cycle kind of moderates down. We get things practical, functional, but it turns out most of the time we still need humans in the loop. And so with sentient AI, existential risk, that question is still open. It's still a topic of debate. The whole takeaway is that predicting future is difficult, and we can't really know what tomorrow holds. So today, we'll talk about not about the future existential risk, but focus on present-day harms and concerns about AI that exists today as it is being used, as it is being designed, and as it is being deployed. With that, I want to open the floor to you. I have this interactive session open on Slido. You can scan the QR code or vote and share with me what do you think some of the negative impacts of AI are. So I didn't get a lot of answers. We'll have another chance for this, and I hope I'll get better answers. For a few that showed up was misinformation, difficult to deploy at large scale, bias, etc. So in the next section of the presentation, we'll AI used in criminal justice system, falsely accusing people of crime, AI used in border security, refugee crisis, being biased against people of certain race, gender, class, etc. And so, when the model does not work, which is often called in literature as AI bias, we have harm. And there are two different kinds of harm, where one which is called harm of allocation, where an AI system extends or withholds opportunities, resources, or information for certain groups. For example, the picture on the left, where you're trying to apply for a loan, but for some reason the training data may not have people who look like you, so the algorithm decides that you have weird hair, loan denied. Or maybe the training data had like people who had hair like you, always default on loans. And so this is an example of bias where for some reason the data was biased and it's denied against you, which actually happens often frequently because our society is biased, our society is unequal, right? Opportunities, people from certain opportunities get more opportunities and other people don't, and that gets reflected in real world data sets, which is then used to train the AI, so AI reflects real world biases, which sometimes is just because our world is unequal and not like because of underlying reason. Another harm that exists is harm of representation. If you've seen recent headlines about like chatbots, like ChatGPT looking for doctors versus nurses, it often says like doctors are male and nurses are female, or CEOs are always white men, right? And that is again harms of representation, where the AI, when it generates certain kind of people, it uses stereotypes. And over time, what that does is it changes our expectation of what the world should look like. So when a child grows up, they may never expect to see female doctors. Or we see that in the previous generation, where they don't expect to see female doctors. So a lot of my doctor friends still get nurses by grandparents and uncles and maybe old uncles. And then because of AI's biases, we make that in media, in pictures, in books, in what we see in the internet, that might again replicate and happen in the future, even though we've worked really hard to counter those kinds of bias in today's world. The second harm comes from AI hype, right? These concerns and comments about future capabilities of AI, maybe it will get sentient, maybe it will completely replace humans, but it does not do so just yet. This is again a recent quote from Twitter. It was posted on May 27th. A lawyer used ChatGPT to do legal research and cited a number of non-existent cases in a filing and is now in a lot of trouble. What happened is, and this is a well-known issue with ChatGPT, if you've ever used it, most of the links it generates are links that don't exist. And that's because ChatGPT is not trained to generate true information, right? It's only trained to generate the most likely information, whatever is most likely to sound like a human. So it has no conception of truth, and what that means is it does not know how to check for true links versus false links, and most of the links it generates is false. But this is the problem of the lawyer, right? Because they should have done their research. They should not post legal filings without just by generating things from a chatbot, and they should have done their research. But at the same time, we should also consider how it has been displayed and marketed, right? Lawyers are not technologists. They don't really understand what AI does and how it's capable and what it can do and what it cannot. That capability and that ability to distinguish its capability and its limitations is on the technology designers and developers and engineers and maybe the company owners who launch this technology. So a little bit of responsibility also falls on us, because when we design these tools, and we will design these tools, right, we need to think about how we market it. It feels really good to say that it solves all the problems, but it never will, and it cannot. And then when people misuse it because we presented it the wrong way, the responsibility also falls a little bit on us. And when this goes to court, it causes a loss of time, resources. Somebody else who might have been dealing with really complicated legal issue, their case might have gone down because of this. A lot of people's time, energy, money gets wasted. So thinking about AI hype and how we present AI and how we talk about AI among each other, but also with general public who don't have as much of a technological knowledge as we do, is really important. When trying to get AI to work, right? many different ways of getting AI to work, many different technologies about AI, and in a lot of it, what we need is tons and tons and tons of data, or a little bit of data, right? But annotated data regardless. And what we've seen is the way we generate this data right now in a lot of these top companies causes a lot of harm for real people. For example, workers who do content moderation in Kenya, they are paid really less. This is also true in a lot of like companies in Nepal who do a lot of outsourcing companies in Nepal do annotation work for companies in Silicon Valley. They get a really small amount of profit, they get paid really less, and they don't get the credit. But annotation work is really important for getting AI to work, right? And in this particular case, they were doing annotation work for content moderation, which is a lot of really depressing images, right? Images about like violence, images about sexual assault, images about pornography, images about abuse, which has a mental health toll, but Meta hasn't provided any benefits or any guardrails for people to deal with these disturbing topics. The second headline here is about, again, right, hotline data being shared with people without consent. Suicide hotline is when people are really vulnerable. They might share their deepest, darkest secrets, and then most of the time they're not aware that this data is being used to train AI. This data is being seen by other people who might be developing AI. AI developers will see this data, and so one, doing that without consent is unethical. It's a human rights violation. Second, once this news becomes public, the next person will be less likely to use a suicide hotline because now they don't trust that it will keep their secrets safe. So it also causes downstream effects where people may not be using these tools which we are ostensibly developing for good and to save human lives. And so again, harm when trying to get to AI to work is, again, we need to think about it holistically and secondary impacts, second order impacts, and think about like in search of like shortcuts and easy routes, maybe we are causing longer term problems. Harm can also occur when the AI model perfectly works, right? For example, in China, a lot of facial recognition technology, computer vision technology, voice recognition technology is used to serve vulnerable oppressed minority groups, Uyghurs. Second, generative AI. The more human-like it is, the more easy it is to fool, which is a success in terms of AI development, the more likely it is to be used for fraud and misinformation. So not just that AI causes harm when it doesn't work, we've also in like today's day and age seen that AI can cause harm when it works, right? So who uses AI, how it is used, for what purpose, what are the benefits, should be weighed along with what are the harms and who might get harmed. So oftentimes we think about all the places where AI doesn't work and think about, oh, it's harmful, but we can fix it. But sometimes what we are trying to do, right, what is success in terms of design and development of technology, when it is launched into the world, it can cause harm. And this again reminds me of similar thing as like what Jeff Hinton said, right? He was really excited about working on chatbots and ChatGPT, but now that it's out in the world, he sees that it's been used for misinformation a lot more than all the other users he'd considered. And so he thinks that we need to put a pause. And so some of these things we can think before we start on it. There have been people, especially people from minority groups, like Black women scholars in America, indigenous scholars in Latin America, scholars from developing countries in Africa, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, who've been talking about these risks before they were developed. And oftentimes people who get effects of AI models are like aware of these issues before like they're launched. And the last harm is due to lack of accountability. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's an open question on like AI accountability, who's responsible when AI goes wrong, and who defines what it means when AI goes wrong, right? It's not easy to say because in the previous slides we saw that it could cause harm when AI works perfectly to design. The second example, again, extremely recent, which is with ChatGPT. There's been a lot of other AI. So now what happens? Is this how can we even figure out if it's a student using ChatGPT, if it's a student using ChatGPT and editing it, or it's just like how they normally write and it's really similar? how do we ensure that there is process of accountability, process of like limiting harm, because at the end of the day what will also happen is people who are considered smart, that even if they use ChatGPT, teachers will think that they wrote it by themselves. People who are not considered smart, people who may have English as a second language, so they would be like, you cannot write this perfect grammatical sentence, you are likely to be using ChatGPT. So already there's a power difference, and people who are used to getting good academic credit, being trusted by academic institutions, will get benefit, while people who are likely to be considered troublemakers, right, even if they're really smart, are considered to be cheating with these tools. And these tools are not perfect, so again, that's more about an accountability and process problem rather than a technology problem. To summarize, right, lots of concerns, algorithmic bias, lack of explainability, I talked about privacy concerns, misinformation, which is a big news right now in India, labor rights, right, people getting fired, people not getting credit for their handwritten work, people not getting benefits for a lot of distressing work they need to do to develop AI, surveillance. We saw examples of China, which is an extreme, but some bits of surveillance is happening in every single country of the world. A lot of those surveillance mechanisms are affecting refugees and immigrants. And so as we try to travel for work and studies, it will affect us. And lastly, accountability, right? How do we ensure that these fundamental principles of democratic society works when these tools are automated, they're black box, they're unexplainable, etc. To summarize, right, it's not that AI is inherently harmful and we should never be using AI, but we should be careful because right now AI can be harmful because it is concentrating power and wealth in an already unequal society. Our society is unequal, I don't think that's news to anybody. And the way AI is used and the way AI is deployed, and this website AI Incident Database is like an open source database of like all the AI harms that you can report. So each of us can report it, somebody goes and checks if we report it correctly and then consolidates it. These are like sort of a pie chart of different kinds of harm. And as we can see, right, a lot of harm is based on the basis of groups that are already oppressed. Race, sex, religion, national origin, immigrant status, financial means, right? If you have money, you probably can get away without using AI. You probably wouldn't be affected by a lot of these automation efficiency gains, and you probably can get out of it if you have money and time. But people who are poor, people who already don't have resources are more likely to be affected. So the problem with AI isn't that it is biased or that it can sometimes cause mistakes. The problem with AI is that the way it is currently deployed is it is without consideration for people who don't have resources. So, moving forward, lots of bad news. So what does that mean? Is this like last 10 days gone to waste? Should we never use AI? That is not what I'm trying to argue. We'll go into what the possible paths forward are. We should be using AI. It is a tool like every other tool. It is a piece of technology like every other piece of technology. And we should use AI knowing that it is not just a force for good, right? The way we use it, who uses it, how we use it, for what purpose, kind of guides whether it's harmful or beneficial. And we should develop AI, design AI, use AI knowing and accounting for potential risk. And that does not mean some uncertain future risk that may or may not happen when AI gets sentient, but like harms that are happening right now in our society with us, right, as we use Facebook and Google, with our friends, families, maybe other people. People who are already facing different issues due to the use of AI. For example, if you go to an ATM and it doesn't recognize you, that is probably an AI issue. I have been through like immigration rights when I cross, and then sometimes it doesn't take my fingerprints. That's because it is unlikely to work for females. It is unlikely to work for non-white people. So we already might be facing these issues. We just don't know it is due to AI. So, audience input, what are the potential ways forward? Make international law, independent watchdog organization, hyperparameter tuning, don't create hype, take diverse data set, companies should be responsible. Pretty good list of solutions. So let's move on. I have a few which kind of encompass some of the ideas you gave, maybe not some, but again we'll talk about them in like all its complexity. Right? It's easy to think about like one solution, but it's harder to actually implement it in practice. So the first is we'll go through technical solutions because most of us are here to do technical work, technical design, right? And one really active avenue of research is explainable AI. And the explainable AI is posed as a solution to a lot of problems we talked about: transparency, reliability, trust, fairness, privacy, right? If we can explain what the AI is doing, maybe people can decide whether they want their information to be private or not. We can build trust into the system. We can also use the AI in its decisions with trust if it can explain what it is doing. Same thing with reliability, like in a lot of safety critical concerns, like for example, we talked about like biases in health yesterday. Having reliability and transparency is really important for doctors to know like when to use the AI and when to use their judgment. But explainable AI is not yet a solution because it is an area of active research and we have a long way to go. One of the biggest concerns right now is there's a trade-off between accuracy and interpretability. The models and the techniques we have which are more interpretable and reliable and less black box-like are less accurate. The models which are extremely data-driven, where we don't have a lot of insights, right? A lot of end-to-end models perform really well, but it's really hard to know what they're doing. And so one of the big research area is how to move this curve up so that they can be both more interpretable and more accurate. Other challenges are like we can say explainable AI and we can say AI can explain everything, but from a human-computer interaction perspective, each of our users come from a different perspective, right? Explain to whom? When we explain AI to engineers, we need to give like very different set of explanations, right? Maybe about hyperparameters, maybe about probability, maybe about true positives, false positive features, etc. When we give explanations to customers and end users, the explanation should be completely different. And then if AI is used to explain to policymakers, right? For example, my research is about disaster risk models, and people who use disaster risk models would be disaster experts who are trying to build these models who require very different explanations. INGO workers who are trying to use these models to plan for like what kind of aid to distribute to what kind of people, where they require very different sort of explanations. Maybe it's the government which is trying to develop early warning systems or building codes, and government officials have come from very different backgrounds. Lawyers come from very different backgrounds, so each of the people who might be using this model might require different explanations. And trying to decide what that explanation is, how to put it, and how to decide what explanation to give is honestly the problem. Similarly, explain what, right? Should we explain the inputs and outputs? Should we explain the trust and reliability? Should we explain what the probability metric means and what potential errors are? Like in a AI model and even in a single inference, there's so many things that goes on, right? What is the data used? What is the use case? Why is it doing this? How it might be feeling? And so explainable AI encompasses all of those possibilities, but when we operationalize it, right, when we deploy an explainable AI model, we can only do finite number of explanations. So again, deciding what to explain is also not an easy problem. And then lastly, like all models, right, if you're generating explanations, there is a chance that that explanation might be incorrect. And so how do we know if like what we have right now is black boxes? How do you know that the explanations are correct, right? How do you know what the model is doing? How can we even decide in like today's data-driven world, like the explanation is correct? So that's another big challenge. For example, a lot of feature mapping, feature highlighting tools that we have right now, they generate these highlights, which is the best guess on how like object classification, image detection, image generation models are working, but that is still a guess, right? There's no 100% accuracy that that's exactly the feature it's using, because in a lot of adversarial figured out how AI has disparate impacts on different kinds of people. These are usually done either based on inputs and outputs or doing like a code review, right? So that's one. The second audit is like regulatory inspection, which is more on looking at like compliance. This is mostly used in like industry applications. For example, when I was working with like self-driving cars, a lot of the cars which go on the road already have to follow certain regulations. So when you build AI models, you have to do an audit to check that the AI code or the AI algorithm is not going to break any of it. Same with like airlines and robotics, right? And healthcare applications. A lot of them have established regulatory framework where any healthcare tool has to follow certain rules, and so when you put AI into it, it still has to go through that regulatory inspection. The second AI audits are more policy based. These happen a lot in Europe. There's a lot of EU guidelines which require this, and they are called algorithmic risk assessment and algorithmic impact evaluation. One is like thinking about all the potential risks that can come from deploying this AI. So thinking about like the potential harms on privacy, on disparate impact, on labor, right? How it might be risky to society, and then putting guardrails against it. And then impact evaluation is sort of once you deploy it out in the world, again, right, kind of doing a user study and monitoring and evaluation of any other technological project. You do an impact evaluation to evaluate whether what you expected when you release it out into the world is similar to what it performed, right? In real world use cases, you see a lot of corner cases and unexpected situations that you do in laboratory testing, no matter how hard and how complicated tests you do. So these are two impact assessments which are kind of done after the AI is released. The first two are usually done by people external to the company. The second two is usually done in partnerships with whoever is releasing the AI. But again, there are different approaches to it. There are different regulatory requirements. People are still trying to develop different ways of doing it. Nothing is set in stone, but these are really promising avenue for kind of putting guardrails around different impacts of AI. But like everything, finding problems is not fixing problems, right? Algorithmic audits, both bias audit, regulatory inspection, algorithmic risk assessment, and impact evaluation, they are really, really great tools for finding problems. But then we still have to fix problems, and we need both regulatory and social, right, incentives to fix problems. A lot of people, if you are coders and developers, you know that you get a lot of credit for building new features, but you don't really get a lot of credit for like fixing somebody else's bugs, right? So fixing bugs is underappreciated expertise in our society, which is true for AI as well. So fixing problems found by AI audits is similar to fixing bugs. It's similar to writing maintainable code. And so oftentimes we don't get credit, the companies don't do it. Finding problems comes with a lot of risk, so you are not encouraged to do it. There's a lot of research on more like policy and social side to think about how to get from audits to interventions, right? How to, once you find problems, how to fix it. But this is should be something in your mind, and I think it should be done. All the audits should be done in collaboration with developers who build these models, because people who design these tools usually want them to work. If it's somebody else's tool, you are like, I don't really care as much, but if it is something you built, you do want it to work, be the best it is. So one of the ways audits can work and audits can be useful is in collaboration with designers and developers, and making sure there's both regulatory and social incentive to fix all the problems we find. And which brings us to a policy solution, right? There's been a lot of ethics guidelines developed in the last 5 years. This picture is from Harvard Berkman Klein Center. They've mapped like different principles. The link here, once I put the slide, you'll get it as well. Kind of like shows every single ethical principle. I read some of these in my research last year when I was mapping ethics in AI. But yeah, and then some of these principles are developed by civil society, some of them by government, some of them by NGOs and INGOs, some of them by academics, some of them by private sector. So all different kinds of stakeholders, all different kinds of experts developing these. Some of the like common from those big principles, right? Fairness to operationalizing guidelines. Like, what does fairness mean? How do you know what is fair, right? What seems fair to me might seem extremely unfair to you. And so we all come from different perspectives. Agreeing what fairness means, what transparency means, what accountability means will be different. And so the challenge is kind of applying these broad set of guidelines into a tool that is nowadays being deployed globally, right? From different contexts, different resources, different like backgrounds, people with different values. And then this paper on the right is a great example of a problem with ethics guidelines. Here, the author wrote like a paper on analyzing and improving an algorithmic system for turning the elderly into high nutrient slurry, right? And in the paper, they follow each and every ethics guideline that they choose, but at the end of the day, what they're taking is taking old people, turning them into like slurry to solve like global hunger problem. And this is an example, and the point of this paper is not to how to turn old people into food, but to show like problems with guidelines, because sometimes you can just follow all the guidelines but end up in a very different place than what you're intending to, right? Thus, by following the guidelines, because at the end of the day, if you turn old people into food and solve global problem, maybe the utility of it is high enough. But I hope nobody wants to live in this world. And so those principles and guidelines and at a high level, thinking about what we should do isn't enough, because when we implement it in real world, there will be trade-offs and contexts and failure modes and actual impact to real people who come from very different perspectives that you have to make compromises. And then last policy solution is regulation. This could have been a different caption. I'll correct it when I upload it. But in the last 5 years, more than 37 AI-related bills have been passed into law globally in different parts of the world. Again, the Stanford University 2023 AI Index is where I got this plot from. It has more information. And there's lots of AI-related bills being passed into law. People are realizing that AI is now part of our everyday society. It's not like just limited to research field, and people are thinking about laws. In Nepal, we have the Electronic Transaction Act, which is trying to incorporate a lot of those things. There's an IT bill that's still being debated, which is, in my opinion, extremely problematic, but they're thinking about like capturing some of the issues of AI in the bill. But, again, it always comes to the but, legal is not the same as ethical, right? We have a lot of great laws on paper, but there's a lot of implementation challenges, right? Just because we have rights in the Constitution does not mean people get to live democratically, fairly. The issues of power and marginalization and different groups of people having different experiences will still exist even if we had the best law. And we can't even agree on what the best law is. A second problem with regulating AI and building laws specific to AI right now is that AI itself is changing so rapidly. Right, when I was graduating college in 2014, deep learning was just a thing. It was like a tiny thing. Now it's like everywhere. And so in just 10 years, AI landscape has changed significantly. We can expect more changes to come in the next 10 years, and laws cannot predict the future. Nobody can predict the future. The third problem with AI regulation is cultural differences. A lot of AI that is deployed right now is deployed globally. Different people, different society, different cultures have different expectations, and you cannot have a single law or a single design that captures all of it. And so some of you said like a global law of AI, but that's going to be difficult, because in AI that thinks like, I don't know, a law that's particular to Nepal is illegal would be problematic within Nepal, right? And that happens because there's a lot of countries in the world which have very different set of laws and conflicting laws at times. And then lastly, accountability, because if anybody's been following any legal news, right, just because there are laws in paper, that's not going to apply equally to everybody. Fighting cases in court, suing companies because they harmed us is extremely resource heavy, challenging, and a lot of the times laws again only exist for rich people. Poor people can't afford to get their rights by fighting it in a legal court. So, is all hope think about like instead of thinking a single solution, right? Maybe regulation, maybe audits, maybe explainable AI, maybe something else, right? Sentient AI. I want to think about it from like a systems-oriented perspective, right? AI is not a single thing. AI is not used by a single person. AI is not used in a single place. So we have to think about AI in a holistic 360-degree way, from a solution-oriented mindset to more like responsible and impact-oriented approach, right? So instead of thinking about like what is a solution to this problem in AI, think about it in more holistic way, right? How does AI impact? Who does AI impact? And how can we kind of protect them or scale that impact? Both of them could be true. And as I said, harms can be predicted. A lot of the harms that I talked about in the first part of my slides did not were predicted by scholars and researchers and activists and writers, right? If you read science fiction from 70s and 80s, we see a lot of issues that we are facing today in today's world happening in those novels. So thinkers and philosophers and activists and writers have predicted these issues, right? We just need to listen outside of like the technology bubble. And maybe we need to, somebody in the previous slide of goals said like talk to more diverse group of people, and yes, talk to more diverse group of people, talk to old people, talk to young people, talk to people outside of technology, talk to writers, talk to artists, right? And think about like how a piece of technology, how different people think about that technology, how they perceive of using that technology, because once you release a tool out in the world, people use it in extremely unexpected ways, and some of it is really cool and some of it is really depressing. And as I said, some of the things we can do as engineers is one, ask questions about who, what, where before designing and deploying AI tools. Right, at the end of the day, a lot of the times we will be paid to develop AI. Right, we'll be working for companies, founding our own companies, maybe working as consultants, maybe working as researchers, but somebody will be giving us money, and people who give us that money will have their own agendas. So think about like who are you working for, why are you working for, what kind of problems are you trying to solve, and if you work for Coca-Cola, you will try and sell more Coca-Cola, right? If you try to work for UN, you'll probably try to do whatever UN is trying to do, right? You contribute to it. If you work for Ford, you'll sell more, your goal is to try and sell more Ford cars. So at the end of the day, whoever you are working for, whoever is giving you that grant, that job, that set of resources, it could even be like free resources, right? Your work will first and foremost benefit them. And so think about like who you are working for, and also who do you want to work for, right? Maybe you do want to do AI for good. I did want to do AI for good when I was working with NAMI, when I was working with Nepal Science Labs, when I'm doing my research right now, and I am aware of like sometimes there are conflicts, sometimes there are not, but as long as you think about it and approach it in like a with agency and with understanding, you can often like figure out a path which helps you get closer to your goal. Second is value data and context. Till today, this might change in the future, but till today, a lot of what AI output is dependent on what data you give it, right? Even in unsupervised learning. And so be really careful about where you are sourcing your data, how you are annotating your data. Is it diverse enough? Is it biased? And if it is biased, is it intentionally biased? Because maybe if you're building a tool specific for women, you do want it to have more like female-related data, right? If you want to build a tool for Nepal, you want data about Nepal and not a global data set. And so think about like what the data is, what the context of the data is, and is it relevant, right? Even data, like the data set that was released in 2010, might be irrelevant today depending on what the data set is, because languages change, like maps. I work a lot with self-driving car data sets, so images that were 5 years old would have been completely changed. Some of them wouldn't even be used because the intersections, the sidewalks, right, the maps, they change. The society changes, so think about both what the data contains and whether it is still relevant today, the context of the data. As I said, center impact and harm. At the end of the day, it's a technology, but it's a part of technology that will impact society. And it will impact people in both good and bad ways, and we can, if we center that impact instead of our intention or purpose of designing the model, it will be really easier to optimizing for more positive impact and minimizing harm. And then lastly, AI can learn and change, but so can humans. In fact, humans are like really efficient at learning new things. And what we are doing with AI is a lot of it is influenced by humans' capacity for creativity and change and evolution. So I think like as long as we're aware and as long as we're reflective about like what our intention is and what our agency is, we can adapt, change, and design our practices that we can optimize for what our goals are. Yeah. And then at the end, I want to close with some exciting AI projects which are trying to counter these centralized, big, globally scalable efforts. One of them is led by Mozilla AI, where they're funding small grassroots group to build AI for their local context. Again, it's a startup, it's a community, and they're trying to build trustworthy and open source AI. You heard a couple of trustworthy AI related projects in this course, in the previous lectures. Masakane NLP is an NLP group in Africa who work on low resource languages, oral languages with like small data set, less compute, and then they're trying to they define themselves as the grassroots NLP community for Africa by Africans, and again they're trying to counter big global NLP by locally contextualized, situated NLP techniques driven by like their own cultural philosophy and priorities. And these kinds of grassroots communities for each other who develop AI for their own local context are all over the world, including in Nepal. So with that, I want to close by saying that today's AI is not inevitable, right? It does not have to be centralized, it does not have to be biased, it does not have to exploit labor, it does not have to cause an existential risk. We are building and designing AI, we can choose what kind of AI we can develop. And so with that, on a more hopeful note, but pointing out that there are a lot of problems with it today, I want to close and open the floor for questions and comments.
Well, thank you. It's really good to listen to you. And it's the second time first was you present in Q also.
Yeah.
Well, once you say something, guidelines of that, 14 and news right now we see lots of fake or what we can say lip-sync things going on. It is not about misuse of AI already started. Right? When coding scenario, this corruption, so far is saying that okay, I have already done this one. And I think we really need to start up guidelines or rules perspectives or something. These are changing a lot, isn't it? Maybe after 4 years we ChatGPT goes down, there's something wrong. So what do you think? Because saving is so much fast. How much the academician, leadership, or government, how they need to adapt, cooperate with these things. So how much, and I want to know about the different experience in US and Canada. How those government initiate with that. So my question is like, based upon again, this is the government thing, how much guidelines they need to adapt or change it based upon this things.
So I think the government definitely needs to develop guidelines and regulations, right? That's one of the main ways we can ensure like ensure some kind of functioning democratic society. So yes, but you point out correctly that AI is changing rapidly, and so from my personal opinion, making a guideline that can like fight that beautifully, right? Or even deepfake. Like one particular application of AI is going to be one like a cat and mouse game, because there will always be a better way of like avoiding that regulations and finding loopholes. Instead, what should happen is that we already have rights in like granted in the constitution, granted like in like international human rights court, right? Right to privacy, right to information, right to redress. And so the way AI policies should be developed is a way to like AI tool feed sending misinformation or a car hitting you at an intersection, right? In both the cases, our rights are getting trampled, right, or corruption. So like the way forward, and I think the United States White House recently developed like an AI bill of guidelines, which kind of tries to attempt to do it. GDPR, with like the right to own your data, kind of tries to attempt to do it, is sort of build on the rights that already exist, that are sort of universally agreed upon, and think about building processes and frameworks where people can guarantee those rights. Because solving these technological challenges cannot be done top down. I think it has to come from local communities, from grassroots communities, from like social discourses where when we say that, oh, giving data is wrong, right? If you have like privacy built into your social fabric, your privacy will be protected much better rather than like having a law that you cannot protect your privacy, because we see with like all those cookie clicks, right? You in theory you could choose not to have cookies, but it's only guaranteed in the law. The best practices for developers is still to put cookies, and so what we get is those annoying buttons where we have to accept cookies or reject cookies every single time. So kind of thinking about both from the grassroots and as technology leaders, it's our role, right, to change the discourse on like what AI should be, what kind of AI we want, and on a regulatory level, pushing the government to guarantee the rights we already have.
Yeah, AI is also very necessary, like for the academic portions, I think that in the course.
Yes.
It's course. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Was that my question?
Anybody else?
Any other questions? Again? Any other questions?
Are you guys ready to stop listening to presentations and present yourself?
Yeah. Can you shout out?
So basically, I want to ask a suggestion rather than a question on behalf of my friend.
Uh-huh.
He's not here. So he was telling me in our last conversation that he is worried about the AI. So what was the issue that his girlfriend is not spending more time with him for asking suggestion and question? She doesn't trust him and asks ChatGPT for more questions. And she has recently even dumped ChatGPT and used for that part. Yeah. So any suggestion?
Wait, the same person asking on behalf of someone.
I think your friends needs to start talking to ChatGPT and try and be more interesting. Can you sing? Maybe sing? Maybe sing? Maybe listen more. Maybe listen to his girlfriend rather than try and give suggestions. That's like usually works.
Thank you very much for your talk. I mostly missed it. Sorry for that. So I do not know if you already talked about it. I saw mostly discuss about the policy and then more in the government. That's all great. More on the academic side, when the students go to engineering school or any kind of school, then what kind of things they should be learning and what kind of content that the academia should be preparing for them to make it not only aware but prepare for this kind of things. If you have, I don't know if you have already discussed, but if you have not, could you just shed some light on it?
I have not, and great question. And I do have a bit of a rant here, so I apologize for it before I start. One of the things I do think like is really problematic with, especially Nepal's engineering education, is it's extremely siloed, right? You go into engineering school, you take all these technical classes. I don't know if the curriculum has changed, but you have like one ethics course in the 4th year. And the curriculum itself is also like designed 10 years ago. All the changes are maybe sometimes if you have a good professor will include it, but otherwise not, right? And it's extremely exam focused. And so I have a lot of problems with that curriculum. I think it needs to be interdisciplinary. My own academic journey has gone all over the place. minority groups and marginalized groups, right? So kind of bringing those in together, thinking about both making the syllabus dynamic so that it can keep up to date with changing technological context, to bringing like the social impact, right? Not one tacked on AI ethics course at the end, but a social impact focused in every single technical course. And then third, learning by doing, right? A lot of the times we get to learn about a lot of the issues when we implement it. I'm sure when you present your presentations this afternoon, you will talk about like challenges you faced, issues you faced, things you expected to work and did not, things you did not expect has happened, right? And so learning by doing, more experimental, more real world focused learning would also help. And then lastly, I do teach a course currently called Computers and Society, which is both a historical course about like how computers have affected society in the past, and a future-looking course about like how we expect this emerging technology to affect society in the future, and thinking of it not from just a technological perspective, but a more social, sociological, and again interdisciplinary, right? Reading philosophers, lawyers, sociologists, artists, right, writers, as I said, science fiction stories from the 80s, a lot of them do talk about challenges in AI. So integrating those kinds of wider social perspectives into curriculum, I think would really, really help.
Yeah, thank you. Done by sir, ask the same questions. In Carter University, in Cognitive Partners, we start the course on ethics of this one as a, not interdisciplinary, as elective course. Maybe it will go as interdisciplinary and for the other departments. And this one will all happen the things here.
Now for yes.
Is it a question?
Like the story of Shepherd and that like lions. So it's more like I'm sharing an experience and also asking a question. So earlier you mentioned that like a lawyer he's not a technical person. He doesn't have like the knowledge of what AI does, and there's like this hype of it. And so just today, like I taught my mom to use ChatGPT. Like she's a teacher, and she was asking me a grammar question, and I was like, "Mom, use ChatGPT." Like I just told her, but I think I'm gonna go home and tell her about like all what I just learned today. So I just wanted to ask you how we can, since we come from technical background, and there are people on non-technical backgrounds who doesn't know what AI is and how it works. So how do you think we can mitigate the hype of it and like make it actually make aware of them about it? Like how do you suggest it?
That's a really challenging question, and I am still struggling with it. My grandfather right now does not eat karela and bindi together. He refuses to eat like karela and bindi in the same dish or in the same meal because he saw this video on Facebook. For you, karela is bitter gourd and bindi is okra. Yeah, because he saw this video on Facebook which says that that might cause cancer. I don't know if it's true. And most of the times we cook those two together, right? So it's been a problem. And there's a lot of other examples like that where my grandma, like see certain things on Facebook, think it's true, and it's really hard to make them understand what misinformation is, how it's happening. Just because you see like a picture of the temple or like a picture of a really deformed baby on Facebook, it does not mean it's real, right? So I don't have an answer, but what I've found works is sort of like try and meet them where they are, figure out like why they want to use the tool, what is cool to them about it, what is useful to them about it, right? And then guide them to use it in like a limited, robust context. So when you put ChatGPT, don't be like, oh, it's like a human, it can answer everything, right? But tell that, yeah, ChatGPT can answer some of your questions. It's really fun to like talk to it, but it does not know what truth is, right? It only answers like probabilistically, and you can say probabilistically, but like put it in words they understand. Use stories. There's lots of like stories and folk stories about like tools, over expecting from the tools, and people getting burned, right? There's a lot of stories. There's lots of like personal experiences outside of AI we've had with
So my question was that if I prompt ChatGPT or BARD or any large language model to ask question about racial discrimination and gender-based discrimination, they just avoid the question or tell us that it is not right to to do such thing. So my question was, how are they doing it, and what are the guidelines that they are following?
We don't know for sure. The right answer is, despite their name, OpenAI has been really untransparent about like what goes into ChatGPT right now. But as far as I know, and there were LLM experts who will be able to answer this much better than I can. They have a filter post training, which kind of puts a lot of guardrails about like profanity, discrimination, bias, right? Things that are considered unacceptable for society. And that is also how like Bard, the Microsoft Bard, no, Google Bard, the Microsoft's version of ChatGPT and OpenAI's version of ChatGPT are different. But that said, we, as far as I know, and I'm not like 100% up to date on this, is we don't really know what kind of like training they've done and what kind of filters they've put. But a lot of the ways this is done is there's a post, like there is constraints during training, there's like filters put post training, and there's a lot of filters put during deployment where they have like canned answers. On ChatGPT, where you ask certain questions, it will say I'm not allowed to do it. And then if you go on Twitter, there's a lot of people trying to break those filters, right? So they have a lot of hacks to ask ChatGPT to how to make a Molotov cocktail. And people have learned how to like break it, and then OpenAI fixes that problem, and then people break it in certain ways. So if you have some time and want to go down ChatGPT rabbit hole, Google like ChatGPT hacks or like breaking ChatGPT on Twitter, and it's really fun. And then tying it back to Sunday's question earlier, one of the courses that U Toronto currently has in the human computer interaction course, they made students do an assignment where you were supposed to break ChatGPT and like list out all the issues you found with ChatGPT. So that's also a fun exercise, or if you're teaching somebody about AI, a more technical oriented person to do like try these things and figure out like what kind of questions it doesn't answer and if you can break it, because that gives you an insight about how the model works.
So my second question was,
when new technology come like crypto or AI, we always try to think about regulating it. What can be done as an alternative along with regulating, so we can minimize risks of AI?
One of them is awareness, right? The thing with crypto we saw was like everybody was at least felt like cheesing it without any critical thought. So building awareness, being like trying to think within yourself, within your circle about like what is hype and what is real, especially as like people who are more technologically oriented, who have more technical skills, we are better at doing it. Second is media, right? And with social media, a lot of us have media power. Third is education. If you're teaching, if you're part of university, you can totally start a club, talk about these things. And then last is like building your own alternatives, right? And then sometimes just wait and watch. Like with metaverse, with crypto, a lot of these really big hypes, sometimes you can just wait and watch, and then oftentimes the hype kind of comes down. And so just making aware of people when they're teasing it, that go for it, but be careful, right? And then giving examples from historical data, past technology, where that has happened, is a good way to do it. And then with regulations, the same thing, right? Building laws takes a long time, and then implementing laws, nobody's figured it out yet, and not just in Nepal, globally. So laws are often not the solution, but social expectations, like culture, right? What we value. A lot of the times, and I've seen this a lot in Nepal, we value innovation over everything else. So we have to chase the next big hype. We are great at early adopters, right? I think Nepal was one of the top people adopting, top countries adopting ChatGPT.
Okay, so I think,
One last question.
yeah, maybe one last question from a different person. Sorry.
Yeah, and then maybe one more. Which everybody has.
Do you want to take his question?
Yeah.
Another question was, in the field of AI ethics, is removing bias against gender, racial aspect only in industry standard, or are you also implementing in research or academia?
Like removing bias is extremely necessary, but it depends on what use case, right? So I think in both industry and academia, removing bias, people talk a lot about removing bias because it's really easy to define and talk about. But for me personally, the way I think about it is again like demarcating use case, right? Who do I want it to work for? And oftentimes I want this algorithm to work for everybody, which means I have to make it sure that it works for like between men and women and non-binary people equally, or between like people from different races, different countries, different cultures. But other times maybe I want an algorithm that just works for women, right? It can be possible that you can think of a use case, and I can't think of it right now, but you can think of a use case, maybe like healthcare applications. Yes, there you go. Cervical cancer, right? Healthcare applications where the issue is specific to women, then you want the AI to be biased towards women. Or maybe you are trying to fix a problem that already exists in society, like solving disaster risk, right? And what we know is in disasters, poor people, old people, disabled people are more likely to be affected. So what we want is we want our AI to be biased towards working absolutely all the time for disabled people, and maybe we can take like a accuracy hit for normal people because they're less likely to be affected. So sometimes like putting bias in can also be useful depending on the use case. And so I would say that rather than thinking about removing bias, thinking about users, right? Who your users are, what your intended use case is, and then defining the operations criteria should be the industry standard and is usually like academic standard with research. One last question?
Do we have a question? No.
So yeah, I have heard about bias for the first time when I have attended a panel discussion on gender bias in AI, in which you were a part of as well in Girls in Tech Nepal. And after that relation that I learned there about biasness, and I always used to answer like what is biasness, and I used to raise my hand and like used to say what is biasness. At that time, I have heard biasness from you, and again like sitting here and hearing a speech here. Yeah, I'd like to thank you, and yeah, I really found it inspiring from that time, and yeah, today as well. So yeah, that's great news. Thank you.
I think that was perfect end to questions, and I think the perfect last talk for the AI. So thank you so much. I'd just like to request Dr. Vishesh Khanna to just come up just for the token of love to share some more. Thank you so much. I think that was an incredible last